So welcome everybody to this podcast on leading in a climate changed world. It's an enormous pleasure today to be speaking to Sara Vaughan in London. Sara Vaughan is an innovator, a positive change maker, and the creator of brands and companies with purpose. And she's done that successfully in-house for De Beers with Forevermark, which was their ethical diamond brand. She's worked with The Body Shop, where she was responsible for developing and driving The Body Shop's global brand repositioning. Beauty with Heart, featuring Lily Cole, and the Stop Sex Trafficking of Children and Young People campaign. And that remains the largest corporate-led petition ever presented to the UN, generating around 7 million signatures and affecting change in trafficking legislation in over 20 countries. And more recently, she was a vice president at Unilever, where she looked after sustainable business and global communications for all the categories and brands, and sat on the global personal care leadership team. She created and rolled out the People Are Beautiful brand for Unilever Personal Care, a 21 billion euro company, and also worked on the brand purpose for the 16 1 billion euro plus brands. So she's been extremely busy, and she now has her own consultancy working with companies and brands such as Unilever and Reckitt Benckiser to innovate, create, and develop their purpose. And she's also a co-founder of Joytech, working with the tech giants to create more human-centered technology, and another organization called A Plastic Planet, campaigning for a plastics-free aisle in supermarkets. And lastly, she's also a long-standing volunteer for Glassdoor, the West London homeless shelter, and has just launched Homeless Stories, a campaign to demystify the homeless and homelessness. So, Sara, you're clearly an extremely busy woman and doing an amazing amount of things, depth and breadth. So it's an enormous pleasure and privilege to have you with us today. And maybe we could just start in with a sense from you about whether the kind of transformation that you're supporting in the organizations that we've named, does that feel like a little niche that a few people, a few rare leaders are understanding the need for, or does it feel like it's becoming more mainstream in corporate life?
So I think that's a really good question. Thanks, Robin, and thanks for the great introduction. So look, I pretty much think that all leaders understand the need for transformation in this day and age. I mean, you know, the world is changing so fast and the problem is urgent. The kind of bridges are burning. I think, you know, you've got supply chains being disrupted with complete chaos. For instance, the entire kind of Italian olive oil harvest is pretty much ruined. So, you know, what are all those companies relying on olive oil going to do this year? You've got Nebraskan farms underwater. There's chaos kind of reigning in the planet. You've got changing consumer mindsets where people are kind of changing what they want to buy. And you've also got, according to Gallup, 85% of employees are unhappy at work. So, you know, these are burning platforms that people need to address. I think that the challenge really is for leaders today is it's not understanding there's a need. It's like, how on earth do we do this? You know, so it's kind of like, yeah, we get that we need to change, but how, you know, what is the what we're going to do and how are we going to do it? And I feel for me, that's where kind of companies really need to have a purpose, because that really helps them define the what and the how. And for me, a purpose is really the kind of the higher reason why your company exists, you know, beyond just making a profit in the world. And so I think once you've nailed your purpose, it's much easier to kind of navigate your way in this world.
It sounds great. And if I was to play devil's advocate for a moment, of course, people say, well, you know, I can't really afford to do the ethical thing, or I can't really afford to be purpose-led because my responsibility is to the shareholders and I have to maximize my profit. And well, how do you respond to that? And what's your sense about whether that's really the tail wagging the dog or it's a real constraint?
Yes, and I think a lot of CEOs are exactly saying that. But I think the real response to that is you can't afford not to in this day and age. I mean, you've got already kind of 3 billion was wiped off kind of major brands last year because people are actively boycotting them. And I think, you know, if you're not actually doing this, people are actually voting with their wallets, and they're leaving your brands pretty much high and dry in increasing numbers. So if you don't change, you're actually going to kind of lose your customers effectively.
Right. So you've worked with some of the biggest corporations, global corporations that we know of. Maybe you could share with us some examples of the type of leadership that has brought about the kind of changes that we're talking about. What characterizes those leaders? Is there anything in common or any qualities that you would say they have? If we're developing a leadership development program, what kind of qualities do leaders need to have these days?
So I think that's, again, fascinating question, Robin. And I'm a great believer in the fact that kind of leaders of today are really great leaders of today, are really espousing what I would call the feminine values of leadership. There is a wonderful book that I have here, and I'll give it a quick flash on the screen, called The Athena Doctrine. And that's written by John Gutzerma and Michael D'Antonio, and this really sets out what the modern kind of leadership values are. And I'll just run through a few of them, which I think will really resonate. And I believe we're very much seeing these embodied, by the way, with kind of Jacinda Ardern, Greta Thunberg, and these kind of leaders. So it really is around a kind of an ability to nurture and empathize. Then it's about leadership which is intuitive. So these are real kind of heart-brain leaders. They really have this idea of putting others before themselves. And Dr. Jude Currivan is working on this at the moment, and she's coined the phrase of severenity. So this idea of the leader really in service to their employees, the planet, and people. I think these guys also promote a very positive culture, and a very inclusive one with collaborative decision making. So you're really seeing kind of, the young millennials actually being kind of, given projects to run and are actually consulted, and reverse mentoring with leadership teams to actually kind of bring these things to life. I think they are very patient, and I think they plan for the future, and visionary leadership is absolutely key to this, particularly in this time of what, the New York police and Paul Polman coined as the VUCA world, which is, a very kind of difficult world to navigate. I also think that they are leaders that inspire through praise rather than criticism. So it's, gone is the kind of autocratic kind of military style of leadership that we've had for so many years. I feel that they also believe that winning is plural. So it's not just about I win, it's about we win. In fact, in the greatest way, it's about we all win. So someone like Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia, who is an extraordinary kind of leader and founder, he is campaigning, it's, the president stole our lands. This is about winning for the odds, not about him. He really is this kind of servant leader. I feel they also really acknowledge that transparency is key. So their decision making is key, and they're very they try to be very honest and transparent, if you like, about where they're at, where their company is at. So it's not about spin. This is about kind of genuine movement. They're very passionate people. I think that's absolutely key, and they love what they do. And I think that's essential, right? Especially if you're inspiring kind of workforces. They also, I think, really build for cohesion, and they really get shit done. Excuse my language, but they really do. I think gone again is this kind of divide and conquer, and this rather kind of internal competitiveness. This is about kind of teams working together to kind of solve problems. Whether it's around single-use plastic or climate change or water or things like that. And I think you're seeing extraordinary kind of models around that. For instance, IKEA embracing the whole outreach with kind of refugees. They started with building houses for refugee camps, and they've actually extended that into skill building, and actually even having kind of factories, if you like, and workmanship actually taking place in camps, which is extraordinary, and really revolutionary. I also feel that it's about a culture of fairness. Gone is the sort of old boy networks, which is fantastic, and this is very much about diversity and inclusiveness, which is so important. And I think also, importantly, it's about using vulnerability as a strength, which is something that's traditionally, in organizations would never have come up. So, the kind of old-fashioned model of leadership is about the kind of the great I am, the king, who knows everything. But actually, this is about kind of, leaders who actually go, I don't know the answer. Can we do this together? I need your perspective on this. And that is just amazing to see. And with that sort of humility and inclusiveness, organizations are really thriving, and people are feeling really motivated that actually what they feel or what they know makes a huge difference. And I feel that there are also organizations that really share. So, if we're doing something great, we're actually going to share that with you. And I think, here Unilever is a great example of that in the sense that, a lot of their, if you like, green innovation and product design, they actually share the IP. Normally companies would guard those with a kind of, million kind of legal documents and patents, but they're actually, outsourcing. They're allowing people to access this, as is Tesla. They're producing the plants and saying, please go ahead and use this. This is for the benefit of all, which is extraordinary, right? Even 20 years ago, everybody would say, you're absolutely, this is lunacy. You're sharing your crown jewels. So I think that's incredibly key. Yeah, I really do. And then I think lastly, they're always learning. They don't know it all, so they're open to kind of new viewpoints and new sources of information from other people.
What a fantastic list of characteristics for the leaders of tomorrow. It's like a great job description for the kind of leadership that we need right now. Yeah. And maybe you could also think about a couple of examples of where you've seen this leadership really transform an organization, also all the kind of way through, because sometimes we come across organizations that have a kind of a CEO who's got a big vision, we're going to do this, but actually the employees halfway down, they're not really so bought into it. So how do you infuse, or how does leadership infuse the whole of an organization, like the DNA of an organization, to be on fire with the kind of qualities and characteristics and sense of purpose that you've just articulated?
So, the most important thing really, again, is to really light the fire within your employees. So, if you have a great corporate purpose, that each and every one of your employees can really kind of resonate with the purpose and interpret it in their own way and really understand what their contribution is. There's a great story, I think, about someone going to NASA and talking to one of the people who was sweeping the floor, and he's kind of like, what's your job here? And the response was like, my job is to sweep the floor so I can put men on the moon, and isn't that fantastic that really that there was that kind of connection? And I think in large organizations in particular, it's very easy to get lost, if you're in finance or HR, about really kind of what your role is. So it's really about spending time with those people and really getting them to articulate how their job and how their function contributes towards it. So, if you're in finance, where are you getting your sources of finance from? How do you pay your suppliers if you're a truly sustainable and purposeful business? You're going to pay them, with promptly for starters. And, if you're in HR, you're going to find kind of like-minded people who've really got, a vision and want to be part of this journey. I think, certainly, somewhere like Patagonia is amazing. If it's become so embedded in the culture that, if they go on kind of environmental protests and actually get locked up, your Patagonia will help them with their kind of bail and really supports this kind of activity and activism, which is absolutely kind of astonishing. So really, in summary, it's about how you take the corporate purpose and how you really help people understand what their kind of functional role is within that, and how does that ladder up to the corporate goal, but also very individually, what is it that they're going to do to make that contribution?
Right, and then you mentioned just in passing, but it feels like it's pretty critical in a way that it's important to spend time with people. So it's not okay for the leaders to sit in an ivory tower and say, this is what we're going to do. You actually have to travel around and be visible and talk to people and help them connect to a bigger sense of purpose and understand the constraints for them. And
yeah, absolutely critical. I mean, one of the best examples of that I've ever personally seen is Dave Lewis, who is the CEO of Tesco. I mean, who literally, is known for kind of going on the road, literally with a kind of mobile office, and he will literally go and sit in stores and be on the store floor, and was encouraging everyone to get out of the offices and into the stores to really understand what their shoppers actually needed and wanted, and really remind everybody that they were in the business of serving shoppers and retail. So it's absolutely essential. No ivory towers, really about kind of getting to know your your team, and really being kind of open to their feedback and challenges. I mean, Paul Polman regularly used to do internal kind of Q&A sessions over over Chatter, which was the kind of internal, if you like, Twitter. And those were, people would ask very pointy questions to him, which he would respond. But it's essential, that the modern CEOs really do have that kind of finger on the pulse, and also really do talk to their kind of younger employees, because they really are the heartbeat, and keep things real, because otherwise I think there is an ability for them to become a bit removed, and also be surrounded by a lot of people who say yes.
Right, exactly. And I'm wondering whether you think that the CEOs or the leaders, not necessarily CEOs, but let's say the people in the C-suite, those people, do you feel that they're born like that? Have they had epiphanies, which have said, I need to do this a different way? Can we support their development and growth in different ways? Like, how do we grow leaders like that? Or is it just a matter of their own fate and destiny?
Oh, nature or nurture.
That kind of thing, yeah. And also, what's the role for leadership development? Like, have you seen, I guess my question is really, have you seen leaders really move and develop and grow like that? Or have you just encountered people who feel like they've got it and they've had it probably for the last 30 years and now they have an opportunity to put it into practice?
So again, I think a really interesting question. Honestly, I think it's a bit of both, if truth be known. I mean, Greta Thunberg, is a very young girl who has, overcome Asperger's and obsessive compulsive disorders to become, a world leader who is up for, Nobel kind of prize nominations. I mean, how much of that is nature and nurture? I mean, she's very strong-willed. She knows her own mind. She's the one who became a vegan, asked her parents to boycott air travel, is really living by her principles. So I think, there is, I think some people are born with qualities and that kind of courage, undoubtedly. However, I think most of it is for most people is learned, actually. Because no longer is leadership about the kind of need to, control or be powerful, which I think was the kind of old-fashioned militaristic notion of corporations. This is a whole different style of leader, who is the kind of servant leader, and I think that is something that they're continually learning, and I think that the really successful leaders are ones that are on this path of continual learning. But the one most important thing that they all really need to have and know is what their own personal purpose is. And that in itself can provide a moment of epiphany. So for Paul Polman, for instance, there was a moment of epiphany, where he really did realize that this was something which was, potentially catastrophic, and in which he needed and ought to make a difference. And that's why, he really led for sustainability and has done so in such an extraordinary way. So,
Yeah, and so would you say there's a role then for something that I'm particularly passionate about, which is bringing together cross-sector dialogues where people, in a way, it might sound a bit like engineering the possibility for epiphanies, but it's something like that where we meet people who are not like us. Corporates meet NGOs, meet grassroots activists, meets the UN, meets government, where different entities come together who don't normally talk to each other. And then there's a possibility for people to say, wow, I didn't really understand that you saw it that way, or that the impact that we're having on you is like this. Is there a role for that? Is that one of the helpful things that we could be enabling?
I would say that's absolutely essential. So I really feel that, again, getting leaders out of ivory towers and into dialogues and conversations. I mean, they're real people too, and this real kind of understanding that we're at the end of the day, we're all human. We all want the same thing, right? We all want, a happy and secure home, for kids to be well, for people to thrive, for our planet to thrive. And actually having those conversations can be miraculous, right? And we often need different viewpoints on what's actually kind of happening. So we can be quite naive sometimes in what our brand is doing, or our mission's doing. I mean, I think Tom's is a really interesting example of this. Tom's had a great idea, which was to, if you bought a pair of their shoes, they would give a pair of shoes to someone in the developing world. But what they didn't really realize was that they were single-handedly kind of destroying the cobbling industry in a lot of those developing countries. And, that was pointed out to them by NGOs. And since they've really actually taken that on board and have really looked at the way that they're working, to their credit. And I really feel that kind of NGOs and those kind of partnerships keep corporates honest. It stops the brand bullshit, because you can start to believe your own stuff if that's all you hear. And I think, can provide very useful steers, viewpoints and perspectives, and a kind of widening of horizons and an understanding of ecosystems in a way that you can't always see in isolation. Again, I think probably plastic is a really great example of this, that a lot of food retailers have been using plastic, because they felt it kept the food fresh. But, with all the kind of understanding about what's actually happening with plastic pollution in the world, and actually potentially, toxins from the plastic affecting our health, that they are the brave are really looking at this and kind of moving away from it. So, people like Eric Doe's Ecoplaza, who introduced the first plastic-free aisle in the supermarkets, and Richard Walker at Iceland, have been extremely kind of brave and courageous in kind of making those moves and kind of transforming the industry, really.
It's all sounding fantastically optimistic. I have a few other questions for you still, though, and I feel like I'm dying for you to reference also some women leaders, because you spoke at the beginning about the need for feminine leadership, which is not the same as female leadership, obviously, and we also know that the odds are stacked against women still being in senior leadership positions. But I wonder if you can also reference maybe some women CEOs or people who are kind of senior leadership who you found inspiring on the journey that you've been mapping out for us.
So, I mean, my two real kind of heroines of the moment have to be Jacinda Ardern and Greta Thunberg. I mean,
right.
Just quite exceptional, and both are playing an enormous kind of role in impacting business in the business environment. I mean, Jacinda Ardern has banned kind of new offshore kind of oil exploration from New Zealand. I mean, we saw how fast she acted on guns in New Zealand. I mean, she is a force to be recognised, and does it in an extraordinary kind of inclusive and loving way, and is creating more regulatory change in a brave way than kind of most other countries. Greta, I think, for all the reasons we discussed earlier, is quite astonishing. In terms of female kind of CEOs, I mean, they're sadly very thin on the ground,
right.
Even now, and I think a large amount of what puts them off is this kind of very hierarchical kind of pyramid system, which is kind of let's fight each other to get to the top and become this very controlling leaders. So I think that the system's not well constructed towards them, but I think there are some very notable examples. So I would really call out someone like Jane Werwand at Dermalogica, who's been an extraordinary leader and has built a business over the years, which has become global and hugely successful and very much a kind of values related business. Also, another Jane Sterland at Willada, who I think really embodies very powerful female leadership and is hugely inclusive and really living by the kind of Steiner principles that Willada was formed on. And also, I feel there's Tracy Woodward, who is heads up Aromatherapy Associates. Who again, has a lot of these extraordinary skills, and it is hugely honest. I mean, she had a very disadvantaged education at the beginning of her life and was given extraordinary chances, and she is kind of wonderfully inclusive and brave and a hugely inspiring kind of woman to speak with. But I think it's interesting, a lot of them are in the more kind of health and well-being sector, because that's where that kind of leadership is more kind of acknowledged, if you like, and revered. And I would very much hope to see some of these women actually, if you like, kind of expanding their sphere of influence and taking it elsewhere. And the fact is, I mean, the beauty and well-being industry is growing exponentially. So, I mean, not only are they a trend, but these women are doing something very right.
Right, exactly. So if we were to do a kind of force field analysis of the kind of forces that are supporting this kind of leadership, and corporations and other organizations to develop this sense of purpose, planetary purpose, bigger sense of purpose, and the forces that are against that, I guess my question is, how do you see those things? Like, what are the constraints and what are the problems that people encounter, and how can we best support and amplify the forces that are supporting this kind of transition?
So in terms of the forces and constraints that I think are blocking leaders, I feel we'll come back to female leaders in particular, because I think that's a special area of all of its own. But I think fear is the main one. Fear of the unknown. Oh my goodness, yes, we're going through a kind of transformational period in the world, but how do I actually deal with it? I think a lack of know-how, just in terms of like, how do I deal with this disruption and how do I lead for the future? A lack of purpose, both personal and corporate or brand, particularly, so many of them are still very financially orientated, rather than really thinking about kind of what's my higher purpose. And last but not least, and this is very important, is really the flow of money, and the fact that most capital and most investors and shareholders are still thinking in very short-term thresholds, and that really is incredibly difficult. There's a real lack of sustainable financing with a longer term growth. I mean, there are amazing things happening with kind of Al Gore and BlackRock and places like that. But by and large, people want, and investors want, their return on investment every quarter, and they're not, that's the major block I feel in terms of allowing companies to and leaders to really kind of unleash themselves.
So would that imply that the major lever that we need to access is actually shifting our economic model?
Yes, I firmly believe that we really need to look at the flow of money and have much longer term, horizons, and really get out of this very short term quarterly earnings mindset. Yes, I do. And
did you see any kind of seeds of possibility? Have you encountered people or organizations or models that you find inspiring in that domain?
Yes, I mean, at Unilever, Paul took the decision to stop really doing kind of quarterly earnings reporting, because he felt it was very unhelpful for the company. And I really feel, with Al Gore's fund and also sort of Larry Fink coming on board, that there is a lot of hope. That we've got major players who are very respected, who are really kind of changing the shape of this, and actually saying we need to look at this differently.
So lastly, it's been a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. But lastly, would you say you're optimistic? Do you think we're going to bend the curve kind of fast enough to deal with the climate change challenge?
I believe we really have to. I think human beings are hugely resourceful, and I was lucky enough to work with Paul Gilding, who wrote The Great Disruption when I was at Unilever, who very much, espouses that humankind can actually get themselves out of very tight spots when needed. I feel though we need to act now. And the IPCC has given us kind of 11 years until climate change becomes unstoppable. And I feel like even this week we've had these horrific floods and cyclones in Africa. There's also flooding in Nebraska. All sorts of kind of horrible and horrific things are happening. So we're there now, and the fact is that the scary headlines that we used to say will come 10 years ago are now arriving on our doorstep. So I feel that there is a kind of sense of urgency. I feel that you've also got within this the rise of the really mindful consumer who is actually demanding change and wanting to see change from their brands and companies and demanding it. And you've got top trending hashtags around kind of hashtag vegan, hashtag cruelty free, hashtag plastic free. So if you're really not kind of abreast of those kind of changes, you're really very lost. And I really feel that there is a calling for brands and companies to actually solve problems, not even be the problem. Don't even advertise yourself. Actually go out there and solve problems, because guess what? No one else is going to come and help. So, that's where I really feel that you're seeing the rise of CEO activism and people kind of really, and brands really leaning in. So Airbnb, again, around, kind of displaced and homeless people, their open house, initiative is extraordinary. Dulux, who are with their Let's Colour, project, are really kind of changing the face of, communities. Dove with their self-esteem program, which is unbelievable and has reached kind of millions of young boys and girls around the world. And these are kind of much needed topics. And I think also, also driving this is this understanding that people are the new media, as my friend Afdal Aziz would say, who's author of The Good is the New Cool, which is an extraordinary book he and Bobby Jones have written. And that, people are on their phones. We now live in a world where I think something like almost 5 billion people are connected on their mobile phones. If you're doing the wrong thing, you will be found out. And people will talk about your brand and take it down. And, if you've got any decent social media monitoring, you realize that your brand and company is under scrutiny and is under attack, and there is an open invitation for you to really step up with your leadership team and actually make a bigger contribution to the world. And people will vote with their wallets. I mean, they will actually buy the products if they feel that your company is sustainable and you're really creating a change in the world. So it's one of those things. Yes, the world is in crisis, but crisis in Chinese also means opportunity. And this is a real opportunity for companies, brands, and leaders who really want to step up for the challenge and do things differently.
Yeah, great note to finish on, Sarah. Thank you so much. It's been a fascinating and deep and inspiring 30 minutes or so with you. And you remind us at the end, of course, that that's one of the places that we all have a lot of power. Every time we shop, we vote. So let's also use our own money wisely and make our consumer decisions wisely and contribute our best efforts and our best thinking to this.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. Wish you every success in all the amazing work that you're doing. And thanks again for your time today. And yeah, just many thanks and good luck to you in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Robin.